Hello. Today we're going to talk about women in sci-fi. I recently watched the movie Under the Skin for the 4th time recently, this time with my wife, who had never seen it before. Like every other time I've watched it, I was amazed by its simplicity despite its scope. It's a huge movie, with massive themes that has only one main character in it. It's beautifully shot, acted to a microscopic degree by Johansson, expertly put together and confidently places its themes and arguments front and centre. It's not an easy watch by any stretch, but it's a true blue cinema classic, and I hope will be remembered as such. Despite being a sci-fi, it underplays that element of the story in a lot of ways, while also being so revolutionary in its imagery during its sci-fi moments that it has influenced more mainstream pop culture fare like Stranger Things. One of the main themes of the film, brought out by its sci-fi elements, is that of identity and gender. An essay posted on Curtsies and Hand Grenades explains far better than I how the movie can be read as an allegory for transgender identity, exploring as it does societal alienation and body dysphoria. My wife also explained that a scene where Johansson's character explores and admires her naked body as being much needed for her. As a cisgendered straight man, I confess to not immediately noticing or understanding some of these themes or moments, but when informed about this range of interpretation, I was bowled over anew at the complexity that can be derived from such a seemingly simple motion picture. I identified with it as a beautifully crafted work of art that used its sci-fi elements to carry a theme of identity, but hearing the multiple interpretations, mainly from women, helped me understand better not just the film, but female experience too. A friend of mine who also saw it at the cinema described a few audience members walking out of his screening. A fact I could not fathom at the time, but while I don't agree with it, given my ignorance on certain elements within the film, that reaction makes a little more sense to me now. This is because Under the Skin, and the other films I'm going to mention, places gender at the heart of its story. To understand why that's important, let's look at some other recent sci-fi offerings for context. Arrival is another recent film I saw with my wife that I loved aesthetically, but also deeply affected me emotionally. Discussion of temporal perception, determinism, and language has been a core element of my research as a writer and is part of the central thesis of my forthcoming book, Times Lie, the narrativization of life, available from all good bookstores from April 24, 2020. So it was a satisfying watch in that regard, but each of the characters' arcs said something profound to me too. I'm ashamed to admit, however, that, again, it was only after speaking to my partner, and some other women in my life, that I was better able to see and understand the theme of motherhood and the inherent morality of the choice to bear a child that is so thoughtfully expressed in the movie. Regardless of how much I loved Denis Villeneuve's direction, Johan Johansson's score, Bradford Young's massive cinematography, it was discovering this element of the film and the nuance with which Amy Adams portrayed it that strikes me most about the film now. Again, though, its reception by others confused me somewhat. Discussing it with a stranger in a store, my wife and I were left perplexed by this person's reading of the film as being solely about time travel, an understanding of the film that negates its main plot point and overall emotional impact. Annihilation was released in cinemas only in the USA, and thankfully I was in the country to see it in theatres before it transferred solely to Netflix. It's a film that really rewards viewing on the big screen. Alex Garland has been a screenwriter whose career I have followed for a long time, and subsequently as a director too after his wonderful debut Ex Machina, another film that revolves around feminine agency viewed through a sci-fi lens. Annihilation has an almost entirely female cast, with the 5 lead actors occupying 80% of the screen time. This serves as a method through which to explore other themes around feminism. Whether that was intentional or not, I will get to shortly. Most notably, it is about mutation and corruption, nay, annihilation, on multiple levels, but explicitly with regard to identity within relationships. The question of how Portman's character defines herself in her relationship with her husband, and without him, her guilt, and how that manifests, and how we all reject yet need change, are universal themes, yet when told from a female perspective, it is an enlightening experience for a cis man like me. The themes of Annihilation are much more explicit than those of Under the Skin and Arrival, but no less potent and, again, just as revealing to a straight cis man whose life experience has not brought him into contact with a lot of these ideas. Even in the case of Ex Machina, I was struck by my response to its ending. The fact that Ava escapes and leaves two men to die, I initially found irritating. Why had she not let poor Domhnall Gleeson go? When I tried to understand why I felt this way, I realised it was that insidious, latent misogyny that lurks in most men, that disagreed with a woman being the sole successor of the story. I was dissatisfied that a woman, created as a slave, had won her freedom from two men who only had their self-interest at heart. It was another call to reassess how I view women and their perspective. The fact that these four major motion picture releases from large film studios with A-list stars had caused me to address my feelings and understandings of female experience was not something I could dismiss. It made me realise, however, that despite how effective they were at portraying female experience, they were all written and directed by men. While this certainly highlights the need for more women to be given roles behind the camera and in executive positions that make decisions on which movies are made and how they are released, Paramount, for instance, chickened out on a full global cinematic release of Annihilation, while Under the Skin only ever got a limited release despite having one of the most bankable Hollywood stars in the lead. It also highlights the only current available method of getting wider, largely male, audiences to address their perceptions and feelings toward female experience. For cinema and culture at large to be able to not only see but empathise with the issues listed above, the women in these films must be, quite literally, alienated. As Marx defined it, alienation is the estrangement of people from what he called their species essence, due to living in a society of such extreme class division. This gap between what we are and how we live defines who we are, and it is no coincidence that our translation of Marx's ideas shares its etymology with our idea of an alien as a being. Aliens are both unknowable creatures from beyond the stars, but also a name for migrants from other parts of the world trying to enter a nation not of their birth. By this definition, to be or seem alien is to be othered, seen at a distance, to never be fully understood or experienced by another. With this understanding of what alienation is and how its theoretical definition and its more literal definition interact, it seems clear to me that when a man is constructing a science fiction narrative and populates it with women, this is a manifestation of how female experience is perceived by them. It is alien, both literally and figuratively. While this is certainly troubling, the fact that this method is able to convey themes of female experience so that I, and likely many other cis men like me, were unaware of, or unsympathetic to, is at least an indication of some progress being made. At a time when on-screen representation and diversity is a hot-button issue, this feels like an important definition to make. Whether it is the outrage and outright attacks on the cast of an all-female remake of Ghostbusters, the firing of a woman anchor for humour that would only get a slap on the wrist for their male counterpart, or a lesbian comedian being questioned whether they are funny enough for daring to discuss their experiences as a gay woman. We are seeing the vast disparity between the sexes clearer than ever, thanks to this presence in popular entertainment. With the global Me Too movement bringing the everyday sexism and abuse in every industry to light, it is increasingly difficult for anyone wedded to the past model of gender roles in society to not be forced to question their beliefs. While many will double down and attempt to boycott films like Star Wars because of their casting of a woman in the lead roles, many others will see this as a success for representation, which it unquestionably is, despite and indeed because of the ugliness it unveils in society. But the discussion never extends beyond this. It doesn't gravitate towards questions of who constructs and commissions these pieces of mass media unless, of course, they are called out for sexual misconduct, as Harvey Weinstein finally was. But why didn't we take that opportunity to question why he financed hot garbage like Addicted to Love or Crow City of Angels, when there were no doubt many more female-led stories to be made and told at the time? It's a shame that the entrenched Meninist trolls are so resistant to the female-led films I mentioned above, because if they were to actually just sit and watch them with an open mind, they would find more in common than they might think. This is because while they may feature women, they are written and directed by men who deliberately translate the alienation created by the disparity between the sexes in society into a literal space. It is sad that this seems to be currently the only way female and transgender experience can be digested by a patriarchal culture at large. But I, at least, am grateful that these films exist. Not just because they are plain excellent films, but because they are attempting to convey experiences beyond what the stagnant crop of a lot of recent cinema has achieved, even if the only way that can be accomplished is through the lens of aliens and alienation. Despite what the book may say, men are not from Mars and women are most certainly not from Venus. I only hope that, in time, and with more women in the business side of the arts, we can dispense with the need for explaining female experience as if it were from another planet. Today we learned what alienation is, that sci-fi can be used to convey narratives about gender, and the entertainment industry needs more women and people of colour in positions of power. Be sure to note this down in your exercise books, as these topics will come up in future videos. Thanks for watching.